spins a web any size. Catch his thieves just like flies. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man.
Hello and welcome back to Amazing Spider-Man Classics, the show that is dedicated to bringing you every major issue, every guest appearance, and every cameo we can find of the Amazing Spider-Man. My name is John Wilson, and we're going to be jumping into the show in just a minute, but I wanted to first let you know that there is a new addition to the Libsyn page that hosts this podcast. If you visit amazingspiderman.libsyn.com, you will find an X-Men blog that I am doing that is going to follow along with this show as far as chronology goes with the X-Men comics. I can't promise it's going to be as great as the show is. I'm not necessarily funny, but I'm going to try to put some good thought and effort into it, and you can let me know what you think by writing into the same email address, amazingspidermanclassics@gmail.com, or just leave notes on the blog postings on the Libsyn page. I also want to encourage you to visit the From Crisis to Crisis, a Superman podcast, which is co-hosted by our guest co-host this month, Jeffrey Taylor. It is a show dedicated to the life of Superman between his reboot in 1986 and the Infinite Crisis wrap-up of this incarnation in 2006. That is co-hosted by Jeffrey Taylor, and that is a weekly show found at supermanhomepage.com and fortressofbaileytude.com. So now we rejoin the conversation with Joshua Bertone, Donovan Grant, and Jeffrey Taylor as we jump into Amazing Spider-Man number 10. Which was released December 9th, 1963, with a cover date of March 1964. It actually had a rather plain Jane cover. I remember looking this up after noticing that the cover was so blah, and I checked the credits, and Jack Kirby...
It's not Dicko, is it?
No, Jack Kirby did the breakdowns here with the pencils on Spider-Man's figure, which might explain the wonky webbing on his mask. But yeah, I'm not a fan of this cover at all. Spider-Man's pose, I guess, is okay, but nothing else about it is really very interesting.
Looks like the big man and Spider-Man are like, grab my hand. I can't reach.
It's the Adam and God pose. From, was that Da Vinci or Michelangelo?
Except Michelangelo never drew a gay cowboy.
Or did he?
That you know of.
Yeah.
Look here, see?
Never has anyone fought such merciless foes as the Enforcers. In this issue, learn why J. Jonah Jameson really hates Spider-Man.
Oh, yes.
Opening splash has another pose of the Enforcers against Spider-Man, but this time Spidey is on his knees. I'm not going to wonder anything else about that scene. Who is the big man? At this point in the series, the credits begin to take on some personality from time to time. And here we have smiling Stan Lee, swinging Steve Ditko, and sparkling Sam Rosen. The story is called The Enforcers, and it opens with the big man plotting several daring heists, seeking to rule New York's underworld.
Dude, you have to read the disclaimer.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, if you've read this far, now this is the very first panel after the splash page.
No, the splash page disclaimer.
Oh, the splash page disclaimer?
Caution! Think twice before starting this movie-length tale. What? We feel it only fair to warn you, once you have read it, once you have savored the thrills and surprises which only Spider-Man can provide, you may find it difficult to ever again be satisfied by lesser magazines.
And they believe their own hype, because the next page they say, okay, if you've read this far, we figure you're hooked. There's no turning back now, so hold on to your hats. Here goes one of the most exciting super adventures you've ever read.
Stan.
Definitely
Stanley, drank lots of coffee.
Definitely more exciting than Moby Dick. But so we open with the big man plotting several daring heists, seeking to rule New York's underworld. The local criminals who doubt him are persuaded, to put it loosely, by his three chief henchmen, the Enforcers: Fancy Dan, Montana, and the Ox. Peter learns that Aunt May requires a blood transfusion because the operation last time got fracked up. It doesn't say that, but that's my interpretation. I'm just going to go with the theory that the operation she had last time was messed up, and that's the reason that she's going to have health problems for the rest of her life.
I love that retcon.
Although fearful of the result, because his spider power is in his blood, the life is in the blood, thus saith the Lord, he agrees to provide his blood for the transfusion. And while Aunt May is mending, he sets out as Spider-Man to oppose this new crime wave.
While Aunt May's mending, he ships her off to Florida.
Oh yeah, that's right, with the Abbotts. I didn't
Get
write
out of here.
The other neighbors besides the Watsons. And
On the other side of the house, yeah.
yeah, these neighbors never show up again. Meanwhile, Jameson begins suggesting in the Bugle that Spider-Man is the big man. Despite...
Of course he does.
Of course it is, because if there's a villain, it's really Spider-Man in another mask. That's just the way he works. I know this
Luckily,
guy.
Foswell read the last issue, and he says, "Didn't you do this last issue?"
Yeah. Frederick Foswell, of all people, is like, maybe you shouldn't do this. So Peter comes across Betty being threatened by the enforcers, who have come to collect on money she took from a loan shark, continuing the saga of Betty Brant. So he finds the thug who led the enforcers to Betty, and when the thug won't talk, Spider-Man blindfolds him. I can't talk. Blindfolds him with web. And in what is, for me, the best part of the book, he takes the thug to this giant spider's web he's rigged up, and there's this giant fake spider propped up behind him made out of wood and webs. He rips off the guy's blindfold and scares him into talking. He's never done this again since that I know of. I just think it's hilarious. So Spider-Man finds the enforcer's hideout, but they fight him to cover the big man's escape. When Spider-Man notices Jameson nearby, he wonders if Jameson is the big man, because there's irony.
If this was a cartoon, they'd be bumping into each other, and they'd both be saying, like, at the same time, like, over each other's voices, "You, at the big man's hideout, you must be the big man," like, pointing to each other at the same time.
Right.
And they're like, "I'm not the big man, you're the big man."
So Betty is so distraught over Peter getting tangled up with the enforcers that she leaves town, which I think is awesome. She, promises that they're going to talk about it the next day, and the next day she's no longer there.
No, he doesn't even call her to talk about the enforcers. He's forgotten about that. He's calling her to say, "Why would Jonah be in that neighborhood?" And she's like, "Oh, Peter's probably worried about me and the loan sharks." Nope, he doesn't care.
So to draw the big man out, Peter claims around school that he knows the big man's identity. There's even a good moment with Flash where Flash is like, "Dude, watch it. You're going to get in trouble." But Peter, of course, wants to get in trouble. And sure enough, the enforcers take Peter prisoner and place him in a cell. Peter breaks out as Spider-Man and defeats the enforcers. But the police arrest Foswell as the big man. Jameson fumes over being bested by Spider-Man again, but secretly admits that he is jealous of Spider-Man's goodness and power, which personally I think is a load of crock. But with the crisis past, Peter wonders what Betty's personal problem could be, and thus the mystery deepens and the thick plottens.
I wonder what's up with Betty. Could this have anything to do with the fact that those gangsters were shaking her down? What's going on? I mean, she just left. That's so strange. Like, he literally does not mention the fact that the enforcers were shaking her down for the rest of the issue. He forgets about it. And he's like, "She left? That's funny."
I don't know if you guys have talked about this yet, but the web parachute.
Did you not do that in the...
I think he did that in issue 1. I'm not sure.
No, I mean, he's done it before. I just still think it's stupid. It's not one of those things that I'm glad that they didn't keep it forever.
Science! It actually leads into there's a point in the story that leads into one of my favorite Spider-Man issues of all time when he gives her the blood because he is afraid that the radioactive blood will affect her, and it actually does later on.
Yeah. When is that? When does that come back to bite him in the butt?
Issue
31.
Oh, that's the whole thing with that. Okay.
Oh, yes.
That whole blood transfusion thing, good job there. You notice how, for a while in these notes they say editor, but, eventually they just shorten it to Ed instead of editor, see last issue, Ed.
Well, then Stan starts giving himself creative nicknames like Stern Stan and Swashbuckling Stan and, Suck You in the Stomach If You Look at Me Twice Stan.
They also, whenever they say, was it The Wrath of Electro? That wasn't the title. And then the issue before, it was, an issue later, Dr. Octopus versus Spider-Man. That wasn't the title of the issue. They change it every time. Or the case of the Sandman.
Okay, now
even here, the credits do say Smiling Stan Lee, Swinging Steve Ditko, and Sparkling Sam Rosen.
Right.
Is he a Twilight vampire or something?
Does everything sparkle with you? It sparkles with me. I also love the little intros that Stan does on the opening splash pages because I know Stan Lee's voice really well. And he has one of those voices where you can hear the exclamation point at the end of his sentences.
Yes.
So I don't feel as though they're overused at all because when he speaks, I can hear it. And when I read this, I hear his voice. When I read any of the narration in these earlier issues that he did.
Right. Yeah, it's very easy to hear his voice.
And then, of course, he did become the narrator.
What do you mean?
In the 60s animated series, wasn't he the narrator?
In Amazing Friends, I know he was.
Amazing Friends, yeah.
The first season of the 60s, there's no narrator. I just recently finished the first season. There's no narrator there. But there may have been one later, and there was one in Amazing Friends. So
Okay, so on page 13, you see that guy who's spying on Peter and Flash at the school about how, Peter knows who the big man is? That's the Vulture.
Really?
No.
Oh, is that...
Really?
No, it's not really the Vulture. I mean, he's drawn like the Vulture. Like,
yeah, he does.
Well, according to Marvel chronology, edition from 19... That's actually Adrian. They retconned it that it was Adrian Toomes.
Well, okay, speaking of random
That's his
retcons,
bastard love child.
Yeah.
Sure hope not.
I actually have, names for all the enforcers. I don't know if y'all are familiar with what these are or not.
Montana.
Oh, I know Ultimate version, they have them. They have the real names.
My first appearance list, I'll just run through this real quick, is Frederick Foswell, and he'll be back in issue 23. The Enforcers, Fancy Dan, the Ox, and Montana. For those keeping track at home, we do eventually learn these guys' real names according to Official Handbook of the Marvel Universe, Deluxe Edition, number 4 of 1986. Fancy Dan is Daniel Brito, the Ox is Raymond Block, and Montana is Jackson W. Bryce.
Yeah, those are different from Ultimate version, I think. I just remember those being
Definitely different from the Spectacular version.
If you look on page 20, the very bottom panel, Jameson's face and the way it's shadowed, it looks like one of the panels of Big Man's face earlier in the issue. So it's like it's like they're subtly setting him up to be the Big Man, even though you find out it's Foswell on the next page.
They're teasing you that Jameson is the Big Man all the way through the issue up until the last minute.
There's some great faces in this issue. There's some really nice they're very Ditko-y faces, and one of my favorite parts of this whole thing is like when he gets hassled by Peter in his civilian identity gets hassled by the enforcers. On page 8, the top 3 panels, the entire time he has that whole Spider-Man face.
I had a note about that because I've heard you guys talk about that, and it's way overused here. I'm actually one of the ones who likes when that happens, but it's way overused here. There's no reason for it to be on all 3 panels here.
No. I actually really love it because I think that in that whole time he's like upset. If Betty weren't there, he'd just like just take his clothes off and become Spider-Man. To me, I thought that was really cool. But to each his own.
Well, on the page before, it's the other half of his face.
It's like he went to work and he forgot to take half of his mask off, and everyone's just kind of being too polite to say something.
Okay, I'm only seeing 2 half and half panels.
I see. Okay, on the bottom of page...
On the bottom of page 7, there's 1.
And then
on the top of page 8, there's 3 right in a row.
Okay, I was actually 2 pages earlier than y'all.
Okay.
Gosh, Peter, you're like a volcano waiting to explode. I hope that's not the signs of an abusive boyfriend later.
Yeah, 4 and 5 also had some half and half faces.
Betty, on that last page, let me read that dialogue on the last page. Life is so meaningless, so empty without Peter. He's all I had, all I ever wanted, and yet I can't turn to him now. You've been dating for how long?
You've been dating?
An issue.
Yeah, seriously. I've got to see this through alone. I can't risk the life of the boy I love. No one else can help me, except someone like Spider-Man. But what chance would I ever have of receiving aid from him? Irony, because Spider-Man is Peter. You get it? But yeah, Betty is such a teenager, because because when you deal with teenagers and whenever they're in a relationship that's been 4 hours long and the relationship's going bad, that's what he was my whole world. Life is so empty, and it's like, dude, you've been dating for a day.
Right. That's another one of those things with teenagers where when you're a teenager, everything seems way more important than it actually is, and the stuff that doesn't seem important usually is the stuff that's important.
Untold Tales later retcon that Betty's mom was kind of like a vegetable who Betty was taking care of and paying all these doctor bills for. That's one of the reasons why she did the money from the loan shark, which actually it's interesting because maybe that's one of the things that drew her and Peter together, because they were both kind of taking care of their sick parental figures. But it makes these issues wonder, how could Betty have just, and obviously at the time these were written, nothing was known about Betty's mother, but how could Betty just take off to another state when her mom's when she's living with her mom and she's paying this live-in nurse or whatever, and her mom's a vegetable?
Or spend a whole day with Aunt May instead of her own.
Yeah. Well, they were
going to work every day and working overtime.
I mean, if you guys get a chance, read issue 12 of Untold Tales of Spider-Man, because it goes into Betty's background. And it's funny because in all the years until that was published, we never did get Betty's background. It's just one of those things that for a character so old, I couldn't believe that they never explained it. When I remember reading the solicitation at the time, at last, the secret history of Betty Brant, and I was like, this character's been around since the Silver Age. There's no way that they've never told her history.
Actually, yes.
Yeah, it's funny because of all the good stories that we do get out of these, first 5 or 6 years of Spider-Man, there are so many holes in the mythology that are waiting to be filled. And that, I said this last month, but the Untold Tales of Spider-Man, I just take my hat off to that effort to kind of fill in some of those background holes and tell the stories that are wanting to be told out of all this era.
Kurt Busiek and Pat Olive, we salute you.
Yeah, the one who never got any background, who I was always curious about, was Ned Leeds. We never knew anything about him, but he's dating Betty Brant, which is all well and dandy, but Betty Brant's a teenager, and you're assuming that Ned Leeds is an adult. Was Ned Leeds also a young guy or something? Like, what was the story there? We never got that.
I think he's like in his early 20s, but...
Well, hey, if she can cut her own meat, she's fair game.
Well, like, if knowing that Betty's a teenager, when you get to the Ned Leeds issues, it makes Ned Leeds seem really creepy because, like, he's very possessive over her, and he proposes to her, like, very, very early in their courtship. It's like he's, like, trying to get this child bride or something.
But then they take forever and a day to get married.
When does Ned Leeds come into it? I can't remember what issue that is.
Issue 18, Peter sees them out together, and he calls Ned another boy. He uses boy, like, to emphasize that this is a young guy. But then the next issue, it turns out that he's working at the Bugle.
I was about to say, because a lot of times you can just tell that they're being written as teenagers for the convenience to relate to the readers, but they're really kind of like for the plot's sake. They're just basically writing them as adults. Like Peter in one issue is like, actually, Aunt May, I want to take a trip to Pennsylvania for the weekend, and he's like 16. I would never be able to pull that off with my mom
by himself.
Yeah, exactly. And they say like captions after a plane ride through a jet. I'm like, the hell? How's he doing this? Yeah,
and it would actually be faster to take a bus
from New York to Pennsylvania.
Well, now because of like airport wait times and everything, I don't know how quick you can get on a plane back then. I mean, it was probably
There's probably like no security. You probably just walk straight out onto the tarmac and just board the closest plane.
I mean, they probably didn't even search him for his web shooters or anything.
Probably not.
But yeah, I mean, and Ned was like, in the first few issues, like, he got sent away for Europe on an assignment for the Daily Bugle, so I doubt that the Daily Bugle would have sent a teenager for, like, overseas war assignments.
Well, he could be a high school graduate. He could be 19. And I think that, the modern-day concept of adolescence and young adulthood was not nearly as developed in 1963 as it is now. I think that once you were out of high school, you were considered to be, you're ready to do whatever it takes to be a grown-up.
That's true.
And these issues are essentially progressing in real time. I mean, they say that the last issue happened a month ago, and a month ago is when the last issue was published.
So Betty's freak out about how Peter's her whole life. They've been dating a month, at the very least, a month.
Or the most, yeah.
2 months.
He was my whole world. What about your dead mother, or your dying mother?
If we go by release time, and actually a lot of the early Marvels in these first couple years when they were still new, they considered calendar time as their actual time schedule. And a lot of times they'll reference to, we haven't seen him in a year because it was a year since the last comic he'd been in. But it's been, issue 7 is when they had their little cuddle under the desk, and this is issue 10 now, so 4 months possibly they've been together.
So Jonah's confession.
Yeah, it's something that's never been brought up again.
No, it's been brought up.
I just don't believe it. I don't think that later interpretations of Jonah can really jive with this.
In fact, the great Marv Wolfman, he had a really great scene at the end of issue 192 where they adapted this into the animated series, but without Jonah's confession, but where Peter and Spider-Man and Jonah are tied to a bomb together by a dying Spencer Smythe.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, the bomb's about to go off, and Jonah's still attached to it. Jonah thinks he's about to die, and he has a whole freak out on Spider-Man. He's like, Jonah's having, like, a whole breakdown, and and Jonah, like, later reconfesses that whole thing about how he's secretly jealous of Spider-Man, like, within the last 2 pages of that issue, after the crisis is averted. And you see just how warped Jonah is, because he has to make himself believe this stuff about Spider-Man.
Right.
His whole ego depends on it.
I really like it because I think, in this day and age, we all know that Jonah is actually deep down a good person. But I like the character aspect that he really does hate Spider-Man, like, legitimately, and he can't, even though he recognizes him for who he is, he can't bring it upon himself to really respect him. Like, he says that, I can never respect myself while he lives. I thought that was a really, really nice quote for this issue.
Yeah.
Well, I just thought it was a big letdown that the reason why Jonah Jameson hates Spider-Man is the official reason that's given here is that he's jealous of him, and that is a cop-out and a letdown.
You're just jealous.
To you it is. No.
No, I totally,
actually
I
can't
totally see what he's saying. Like, of all the venom and hatred that's been spewed from Jameson towards Spider-Man, it's because he's jealous. It
Well,
I
doesn't.
mean, he's making him money.
Again, because it goes deeper. Like, if Spider-Man's this great person and he's doing this for nothing, and Jonah, is so driven by, what kind of a person does that make him? If Spider-Man's this good person, it makes Jonah a bad person. So therefore, Jonah has to bring him down in order for his own ego.
It is very ego-driven. It would have to be ego-driven, but just to boil it down to the oversimplified "I'm jealous of him," I thought was, even for J. Jonah Jameson to acknowledge that in his own mind, let alone say it aloud by himself, of course, I just don't buy it, and I think it's a bit of a letdown. I think there are a number of reasons why J. Jonah Jameson can dislike Spider-Man, or flat out hate Spider-Man. We haven't even gotten to Spider Slayers yet.
Oh God,
I can't wait for that. I love that issue 25.
that's one of my favorite issues.
Me too.
It's like a day in the life of Peter Parker. It's like a sitcom.
Real quick, is this the first time Spider-Man has taken on the mob?
Depends on what you consider the mob. You know what I mean? Like, he's taken on, little petty criminals the last few issues and like little criminal meetings. So like mob is a very loose term.
But this is organized crime under a central leader. It's not just a gang of thugs, randomly. This is an operation. So yeah, I would say this is the mob. And yeah, it seems like to me like the first time.
Well, this is also not the first time that Spider-Man goes up against the bad guy in the middle of the story, loses, and then goes up against him again at the end and wins.
Yeah, once they did that with Dr. Octopus, they decided that was going to be their staple from then on.
It's a staple for every superhero comic.
It pretty much is. In fact, I made a comment about that on From Crisis to Crisis with a Superman comic. Probably somewhere around, I can't remember which episode it was. He was going up against the Fearsome Five, and he actually lost in the beginning and in the middle, then finally comes back at the end and wins. And I thought to myself, that's like early Spider-Man comics.
I remember you talking about that, yeah.
It's like every single comic and every single episode of like the first 5 seasons of Power Rangers.
Well, it was also like a confidence issue with the Superman story, and that's totally non-Superman, but it's very, very Spider-Man.
It was also written by Marvel.
5 years after his Spider-Man run. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure that anyone really takes the Enforcers seriously anymore. They certainly weren't used to good effect in the 2-parter with the Bookie a couple years ago. But they do seem to be they're a little badass here. I think that especially Fancy Dan has lost a lot of what is kind of cool about him in this particular presentation. He's a pretty awesome fighter for being such a little guy, and after this he basically becomes a joke and just a little guy with a gun who's always getting picked on. The big man, if we sort of set aside the total ridiculousness of the fact that this is Frederick Foswell in platform boots, I do like the look of the character, especially the mask. The fact the mask does not move throughout the entire story. I like the static mask. I like the fact, it seems scary to me.
Kind of reminds of a Batman villain, like later on in the 90s, or was it the 80s? Or whatever. But like the first appearance, the first design of Black Mask, he kind of had something a little bit like that going on.
My best guess is that was 90s.
Probably.
I forgot.
So in Amazing Fantasy 15, after Uncle Ben gets shot, Aunt May goes to stay with the neighbors. And then the first neighbors that we meet are these neighbors, the Abbotts. And although we never see them again, maybe these are the neighbors that she goes to see in Amazing Fantasy 15.
Well, first of all, Parallel Lives did state that Aunt May stayed with the Watsons.
Okay, that was going to be my question. Is there some way we can know for sure? Not that it really matters, but...
And they did later retcon that the Abbotts were actually the Watsons, because Mrs. Watson was married to a guy named Gene Abbott for a brief period, and that's who those are. So this is no, I'm just messing with you about that.
Well, actually, the Abbotts turned out to be a terrorist sleeper cell, and that's why they're not around after.
Yeah, no.
They were actually Peter Parker's parents' arch nemesis.
In fact, the whole Mrs. Watson thing, that's still a mystery to this day, because she's called Mrs. Watson, but we find out that it was Mary Jane's father's sister. But if it was her sister, why would she be Mrs. Watson?
Well, that's the same with Ultimate Spider-Man and Peter's Aunt May. Aunt May was sisters to Peter's mother, and yet they're all
really?
named Parker.
Yeah. Well, I just figured that in the Ultimate world, it was 2 brothers and 2 sisters that, hooked up or something.
That was the ultimate decision that Zach and I came to, is the only way it could work is if you have a pair of brothers.
And that's kind of what they did in Trouble.
Right. A pair of brothers and a pair of sisters got married.
We're going to talk about Trouble? Are we going to hit up Trouble later on?
What's Trouble? Oh, yeah, Trouble. I remember now. The Teeny Bopper comic, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God, we had a couple of those in our back issue bins, and I just didn't understand those covers.
I've never read it.
Those realistic covers where it looked like 14-year-old girl, it bordered on child porn. In fact, there was recently a topic about it on Spider-Man Crawl Space, and it just...
It's especially funny since comic books are, of course, marketed to 24 to 35-year-old men.
God.
But yeah, we never found out Mrs. Watson. Because you just assume that maybe she was married to someone in Mary Jane's family at one point because she's Mrs. Watson. But nope, she's the sister of Mary Jane's father. And whose last name is Watson. So I don't know. Maybe she married a guy named Watson. It was just a coincidence, and maybe that's how they bonded. Hey, your last name is Watson. My last name is Watson. Hey, if we get married, you won't have to change your last name. And then they got married just for that reason.
When I read Foswell's scenes in this book at the Bugle, it seems to me like they're trying to play that he's been working for the Bugle for a while, but that we're just now noticing him.
Yeah, like Robbie. Excuse me.
Well, no, Robbie came in as a new employee. That's the impression that didn't we have this argument?
Yeah, I was referencing the argument we got.
We're going to determine that when we get there. But
well, Robbie becomes such a prolific character that I think you can just forgive and expect that he's relatively new and just been there for at least a couple of weeks.
But we don't really know anyone from the Bugle anyway. Like in these old issues, the only people that work there are Jonah and Peter and Betty. And in fact, there's the issue with the Circus of Crime where Jonah gets shot, and the only people that visit him at the hospital are Betty and Peter because they're the only two Bugle employees at this point.
He didn't shot. He gets hit on the head or something.
Well, look at how many students there are at the high school. There's Flash, there's Liz, and then a bunch of random people at any given panel.
Right.
Yeah, that's why Untold Tales, basically did free reign with everybody. But spoiler alert, Foswell does come back, and he actually becomes a regular supporting character. And nowadays when you need a reporter at the Daily Bugle, even though he works at Frontline now, they'll use Ben Urich to kind of team with Peter Parker. Before that, they used Ned Leeds. He was kind of the Ben Urich before Ben Urich was created. But before Ned Leeds, it was pretty much Frederick Foswell. He was the Bugle reporter when you needed a Bugle reporter.
And I had the first 20 issues in reprint, and Foswell doesn't come back until issue 23. So I didn't know anything about any of those stories. So once I read them, is like, wow, this is a kind of a really cool little arc they take Foswell on after his criminal beginnings, and then the stories they do with him between 23 and 50. I just thought it was a really good use of the character. Very cool supporting character.
Yeah, I always liked it. Is he ever mentioned? I think he's mentioned in Marvel Knights once, but is he ever brought up again after what eventually happens to him?
Is he ever brought up again, in a conversation?
Yeah.
Now and again, but very rarely. He was one of the first people that died, one of the first supporting characters who died. So he's sometimes mentioned from time to time if you're giving a list of people who have died in the Spider-Man books, but he's kind of mostly forgotten now because if you're listing people who died, you're going to say George Stacy or Gwen, although we might see some mentions of him now because half of the people that Spider-Man feels bad about dying on his watch are now alive again. So
page 8, middle panel, Betty's running away, and she's thinking, I can't do it. I can't let the dearest, most wonderful boy I've ever known get mixed up with the enforcers because of me. And Peter's thinking, I must have been wrong about her. She can't care for me if she won't confide in me. And I'm just thinking, this is the first of a billion situations where Peter's girl problems would be sorted out if they could just read each other's thought balloons.
Or Peter just being a jerk teenager, she's being shaken down by the mob. Dude, this isn't about you. The world, she must not care about me. No. Being shaken down by the mob, which you conveniently forget later on the issue where you're thinking, she's not answering the phone. Hope nothing's wrong. No, nothing's wrong. Just the fact that her whole world is falling apart in the next panel as she's crying, and she's worried about you getting killed.
But in this scene right after the shakedown, if you just look at Peter's lines, he is really being a jerk. He's like, those rats, they're not getting away with that. And then he says, the enforcers, huh? I've heard of them. How'd you get involved? Betty, you're not telling me the truth. Wait, why would you level with me? Betty! And then she's running away talking about how he's the most wonderful boy she's ever known.
Yeah, exactly. It's also we said that we done this before recording, I think, but the guy points the enforcers out to Betty to talk to her. And then Peter, 2 panels later says, "Hey, what's going on here?" But when he changes into Spider-Man, he's like, "There's the punk who pointed out Betty to them." But on panel, it's not showing that Peter saw that. It's just kind of funny to see.
By the way, you know how like some kid, I'm not naming any names here, but you know, some people, like if their parents are out of town and they're home alone, they'll walk around the house in their underwear or something that they normally wouldn't do. Aunt May's in Florida and Peter's walking around the house like for the rest of the issue in his Spider-Man suit. That's like his liberating thing. Like Aunt May's not, he's like sitting on the phone, you know, talking. He's looking for cards from Betty. That's like the equivalent of like, you know, the people who walk around in their underwear or naked when like, you know, their parents are out of town.
Okay, so what about the Batcave? I mean, the spider's web.
It does remind me of something that Batman. It reminds me like DKR when he like held that guy over the city.
You are in my
yeah, he never does it again.
You have to read that dialogue like Christian Bale.
You are in my spider's web. Now will you talk or won't you?
Swear to me.
Swear to me.
And my spider.
Yeah,
Let's see if Zach's
my
on-
one note about that is making a dummy spider out of webbing. No.
He's
Out of-
lucky that criminal is an idiot.
Out of leftover webbing, no less. That should have dissolved after an hour.
Right.
If he would have picked any other criminal, they would have been like, wow, you're an idiot.
Well, I like that when Peter Parker ripped the webbing that he had blindfolding the guy off, he also took his eyebrows.
Yeah. I actually took all of his face. He's actually really bloody under that hat now.
Yeah.
You just can't see it.
Not even you ripping my skin off will scare me. Giant spider!
So page 11 at the bottom. Betty, are you all right? I want to ask you something. No, Peter, not now. I'll speak to you tomorrow, please. And I'm like, Betty, you lie. Because she leaves town that night. And I have to wonder if this weren't a superhero comic, if it were, you know, a more normal story or real life or whatever. If the enforcers have found out who Peter Parker is in connection to Betty, and they can't find Betty because she's left town, and they want their money, wouldn't it make sense for them to go after Peter?
Or her vegetable mother, who, you know, granted she hadn't been created at this point.
So by leaving town, she's basically putting everyone she loves in danger. Awesome.
Well, in a roundabout way, they do end up getting Peter.
I love Betty. She's like, if I speak to him, he'll question me. It's like, no, he just wants to know about Jonah. He doesn't care that you've been shaken down by the mob. Unless your name is Aunt May, he doesn't give a crap about you.
That whole thing's a mistake.
So
Now, Spider-Man cracks wise in fights all the time, but I think this is the issue where it really gets up to the level that we learn to expect.
You think so?
I think so, because I don't remember. I've just recently in the past week read everything up to this just to kind of get myself up to speed so that I can join you guys for it. And I mean, he does crack wise here and there, but there's a whole lot of it during these fights with the enforcers.
You could be right. I do love this fight. I mean, I think this whole issue, Ditko outdid himself throughout, but this fight in the parking garage, I mean, there's so much good action going on here and obstacle course type things for Spidey to react off of.
No,
It's
I
really
think you have a point because of since he's fighting normal gangsters, he can kind of like he knows where he stands instead of like supervillains where he kind of doesn't know what to expect as much. So I think he does have room to crack wise a lot.
Nobody
Well,
drew enforcer fights like Ditko, and I think that's a big reason why we never saw the enforcers that much in the series after Ditko left.
The enforcers, I mean, there's actually some really good fighting here. This is some of the more dynamic Ditko Spider-Man fight stuff that I've seen. But my favorite line is on page 17. A judo-trained little man's always more than a match for a guy twice his size.
Always and forever.
You know, if I were
Always.
short, I would definitely refer to myself as a judo-trained little man.
Yeah.
You gotta wonder how these people like came together. It's like a little man, a big guy named you know, a cowboy. It's
Well, I also want to know how Frederick Foswell managed to get them all together. Like, I guess he just paid them, but, you know.
Did they know who he was? Do you think?
well, the enforcers later operate like independently of the big man, so you get the feeling that they've been a team for a while.
Yeah, because, I mean,
And
there is no big man after this, but there are enforcers after this, so.
The enforcers later kind of drift apart too. I know there's like some of the people who are in the enforcers now are different people from the Silver Age enforcers. I know Oz, the Daredevil story in the Silver Age, had his brain switched with the mad scientist, and then like the mad scientist that had Ox, his body like jumped off a building and died, and then Ox's brain in the mad scientist body, like something happened to him too. It was a really weird issue with Daredevil.
Yeah, I think like the new Ox is actually the old Ox's brother or something, and yet they just treat it like it's the same guy a lot of the time. So the Ox is just kind of a weird character as far as continuity goes.
Like, yeah, the Enforcers are like they do show up again, but honestly, the only time I've ever really enjoyed the Enforcers were Ultimate Spider-Man, because they were, I don't know what it was, but they were just really entertaining in that version.
They were excellent in Ultimate Spider-Man. I do like how they throw Peter Parker into a cell, and like it's a good thing they don't like come back and check on him in the next minute or so, because right there in the cell, you know, with barred windows that people can look through and everything, he changes into Spider-Man. But it's probably because he has the Hypno Coin.
Or he's lucky that they didn't just take him into the car and he was thinking, this is my chance. They're going to take me to the big man's head. Just like shot him right then and there. Well, that wasn't very well thought out.
I'd have gotten away with it too if not for some crummy luck.
Yeah.
Or they just like, you know, like tied like weights to his legs and threw him in the ocean and he's like, save me, Namor.
So what is he doing with the spider signal on 18? He sticks some webs on it and throws it, and then he says bullseye, but he hasn't hit anything. And, I mean, yes, it does happen to shine on a building that happens to be where a police officer is walking by, but I'm not sure how he would know that. It's really a weird little thing that he does. I don't get it.
Ditko! Yeah, I'm blaming it on the art, because even though the essentials were it's black and white, I couldn't mix that either, honestly. I was so confused. So.
It's just showing that Peter Parker is a master of trigonometry.
Yeah. So does any of you remember the first time you read this? Do you remember if you figured out who it was before the end?
No.
I always kind of like, you know, that was one of those things I kind of knew before I just knew Frederick Foswell, or Big Man. The first Big Man was someone named Frederick Foswell, so I wasn't surprised. But it is kind of funny because it's one of those things where a character is introduced and he turns out to be the guy.
I was with J. Jonah Jameson. I thought it was Spider-Man.
Even he doesn't know.
We do have our first little bit of a cliffhanger here with the whole Betty gone off to Pennsylvania, you know, wondering about Peter and Peter wondering about Betty, and they're going to follow up directly on this in the, you know, next issue. So it's kind of the first continuing story, if you like, in Amazing Spider-Man.
As Spider-Man discovers the strange secret of Betty Brant, which I don't even think Stan knew what the secret was at this point, and really, there's no secret that he discovers. It's like, oh, yes, she's pregnant, and Bennett's the father, or Doc Ock, because we're gonna get to that issue. Oh my God, Doc Octopus cannot keep his hands off of Betty for the next 2 issues.
Okay, so Letters page catches up to issue 6.
Okay, well, first of all, John F. LeBar. One thing I like about Steve's art is he really gives us the fans and beady-eyed little rascals something to gawk at. What, with Liz and Betty caviting around in every issue? Aunt May is all right, too. Whoa, stop right there. He's talking about all the hot girls, and he's like, Aunt May, too.
Oh, no. It can't be.
And
not Ditko's Aunt May, anyway.
Oh, God. Well, he's talking about how good Ditko draws the girls. I hope that this guy stuck around for the Ramita stuff.
Right, because, I mean, Ditko didn't draw an unattractive female, but Ramita certainly knew how to pull out the curves.
Well, Rena was a romance.
I still say Aunt May is a piece of ass.
Dude, look at all the guys. I mean, like, okay, Betty Brant was hot, and Dr. Octopus was about to, you know, sexually assault her in the next issue. But who was the one that Dr. Octopus wanted to walk down the aisle with? Aunt May. Who did J. Jonah Jameson's father marry? Aunt May. What about Nathan Lubinsky or Willie Lumpkin the mailman? Aunt May.
Don't forget Skrull Jarvis.
Yeah, Jarvis. Yeah, I mean,
even
Aunt
the
May.
Skrulls like Aunt May.
Aunt May gets action. You know, and Uncle Ben, and that alternate Uncle Ben from that other dimension, from that weird, trippy, friendly neighborhood Peter David issue with the Hobgoblin from like space.
Oh, right. Well, wait. Was he with anybody?
No, but he was all about Aunt May. He was like staring at her.
I'm still waiting for the issue where they reveal that Aunt May now has the clap.
Oh my God.
I've been waiting for that.
It's a brand new day.
of sexually transmitted disease.
Don Foote writes an email voting to ban word balloons.
Email?
Yeah, that's what I just said, isn't it?
Yeah.
Don Foote writes a letter voting to ban word balloons on covers. What do y'all feel about
it?
What?
So he's the one to blame.
Yeah, he took that away from us.
Y'all
Sometimes it really only does take one person to ruin a a good idea. On the other show that I do, the From Crisis to Crisis, somebody actually emailed in and said that it wasn't family friendly for us to bleep out swear words. We just shouldn't have them at all. And the thing is that Michael and I were not even swearing. We were actually saying bleep, and then Michael just added them because it made it sound funny. And somebody emailed in and said, no, that's not family friendly. So that's why we stopped.
Never listen to somebody who complains about swearing.
Yeah, it only takes one person.
You know what I had to say about that? Well, his mother's.
Yeah, that.
Yeah, I'll get right on that just as soon as I pull my out of your mom's.
that will be
Yeah, nothing else really interesting in the letters page. There is an ad for one of the dumbest issues of the Fantastic Four ever, featuring L'Enfant Terrible, the infant terrible.
Oh wait, hold on. Before you say it, there's nothing. Look at the. This is how you know that Stanley's making it up, because in the letters page and the special announcements, while we haven't worked out all the details of the plot yet, next issue will shed further light on the strange secret of Betty Brant's past. It will also take Peter Parker and his peck of pickled peppers to a different town and put him against a different type of supervillain. You may think there are no new types of supervillains left, but we just may surprise you.
Yeah, it's Dr. Octopus.
Again.
That's funny.
I like it. We haven't worked out all the details yet, meaning I haven't started writing it yet.
A month to go.
Meaning that we already sat down, talked about it, plotted the whole thing out, but he's still doing the art, and I don't remember what it was.
Right.
I'm sorry I cut you off there, John. I just noticed that. And
no, it's fine. The Fantastic Four issue doesn't really have a whole lot of importance to it. It's number 24. There is a superpowered alien baby who misbehaves throughout the entire issue, and that's the whole point.
I remember it was like really dramatic because they get his parents at the end, and just to add some extra drama, Reader Sue's like, what if his parents decide to obliterate all of reality? Oh, we're in luck. They decided not to obliterate all of reality.
With issue number 10, we have come to the end of Spider-Man's first full year of publication. He premiered in June of 62 with Amazing Fantasy 15, and then the first issue of his own series hit stands in December. So 1963 was the first year that he was being published regularly for the whole year. And so I would like to take a poll. Of the issues we've talked so far, with just a quick review, we had the origin story, the Chameleon, Fantastic Four tryouts, Vulture, Tinkerer, Doc Ock, Sandman, the Torch popped his team-up cherry in the Strange Tales annual, the Doctor Doom issue, the Lizard, the Return of the Vulture, the Tribute to Teens issue with the Living Brain and the Crashing the Torch Party, Electro, and the Enforcers. What's your favorite?
I'd have to really sit down and think about it, but very instinctively, I want to say issue 8, just because there was,
I was going to say the same one, darn it.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of fun stuff in there with, the whole Human Torch thing. And you finally get to see Peter knock Flash out, which is something that they'd been leading up to for the whole series at that point, with him saying every issue, God, one day I'd like to punch that guy out. I mean, the Living Brain, he's a pretty sucky villain, but, it was worth it to see Peter and Flash fight. And some of the Human Torch, stuff was fun, and Peter leaving the heart for Sue. But I might have a different answer in like 3 hours after we're done recording. Or in 3 hours when we get to the next issue.
I would definitely have said issue 8 for the exact same reasons.
And see, the Living Brain actually takes issue 8 to the bottom of my list.
Yeah,
I can't stand that fight. Like, hate it. But yes, the fight between him and Flash was cool, and I found the fight with the Torch kind of annoying because Peter's being an ass. But that's fine. Y'all are allowed to have your own opinions. Well, just this once. What about you, Don? Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, I'm hard pressed. As much as I dislike the Vulture as a villain, I really do like issue 7, where I can just beat him, as the same way as I did the last time. Oh wait, I can't. Oh, my arm. Oh, I gotta fight him with one arm. that's a really good situation. I like the funky flirting at the end. Baby, I can listen to you all day long or whatever. I kind of like that, and I also kind of like this number 10 with the mobsters. But I think like these last few issues are really really good. So for the first ones, I'll say number 7. But I do like the majority of them. I really don't like the Tinkerer or the Living Brain, but that's besides the point.
I really, really like the fight scene in issue 7. It's one of my favorites of the whole thing because of the printing presses and him dangling over them in the air and, what happens if he went into those rollers. Very, very cool suspense there. But yeah, I was thinking about this earlier today while I was washing the dishes. It's like, if you have a specified way of defeating an enemy established during the first story of the enemy, that enemy is done forever because you have that way of defeating him. So they had to come up with like this nebulous, well, that doesn't really work anymore. He's going to have to figure out something new to fight the Vulture this time. So it took away the Achilles heel of the character, and I thought that was pretty cool. My favorite might be... see, I didn't even think about this before I asked the question.
Wow.
They should have
Issue 1 was also pretty good, too. I like the whole spaceship thing.
running away crying.
I still don't get how Spider-Man even got to the ship as it was falling, but I'm willing to buy into it because it's a Silver Age comic book.
Right.
But I think there are better Silver Age comic books, including basically the ones after that.
Like all the others.
Pretty much, yeah.
I like issue 9. There's a lot of drama. There's a lot of cool stuff between him and Flash and Liz, where Liz is starting to come around. The stuff with him and Electro, as much as we like to laugh at it and make fun of it, electricity is, pretty deadly. Even though it's cheesy yellow lightning bolts, I'd still like the fights. And all the drama with Betty. I don't know, I think number 9 is my favorite as far as character stories go. Is there a moment that you hated?
Besides the spaceship thing?
And the ice webbing.
Oh, ice webbing.
Oh god, I forgot about that. Electro's origin.
Or anytime he makes a parachute out of webbing.
I'll
let it go once, but they keep doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have said Electro's origin because that just insults my intelligence.
It's Stan Lee, dude. All of the origins insult your intelligence.
What's
I
funny,
could
they
kind of
don't-
wrap my head around it and play ball, but this one, I got struck by lightning by a twist of fate. I've got powers. No.
By eating my cereal and milk at the same time as a tornado hit my house, I now have the power to
Spin
make
cereal in a-
milk. Yeah,
To
make
milk things.
Yeah, with a
Watch
funnel.
me milk this cow. That's my
I can
superpower.
control all the milk around me.
Okay, I just thought I'd throw that out at y'all, my little reunion of the whole year thing. Reunion is the wrong word, though. Remembrance?
The year of this
Yeah.
podcast, yes.
There's like a slow montage like playing with like dramatic music and like highlights of Spider-Man's year, getting dropped into a water tower by the Vulture, getting thrown out a window by Dr. Octopus, crying like a little baby after the chameleon, and
In the variant video,
All done to the theme of the Incredible Hulk TV show.
bum 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 bum.
Yeah.
So before we get to the next issue of Amazing Spider-Man, I want to point out another cameo from Strange Tales 119, which actually hit stands the same day as our next main book, Amazing Spider-Man 11. In this story, the Torch is throwing a temper tantrum in public with his flame, all mature-like, and he's peeved for various reasons, from girls to football. Spider-Man's headlines about smashing vast crime rings don't help either. I have to wonder if that's the crime ring from the big man. And this situation is used to full advantage by a man known as the Rabble-Rouser, who is, of course, rousing rabbles with his anti-Torch sentiment. He gets crowds riled up and then uses his will-sapping wand to make sure they stay that way, because this is Strange Tales Torch stuff. So when Spidey hears about all this, he shows up to offer to help the Torch. 3 guesses how the Torch takes it. Needless to say, the Torch does nothing to make us think that the Rabble-Rouser is actually wrong about him. But that's it. Spidey showed up to help the Torch and got flame in his face for his troubles.
that sounds like the hate monger's ugly like stepbrother or something. The Rebel Rouser, and like the powers are similar. He like rouses rebels, and the hate monger like makes hate.
I like the fact that they still use the phrase son even this day, even in the 60s. It's made a comeback here. Hi, Smokey Boy. I just heard the Rabble Rouser. You sure are on his most popular list, son. Well, we're going to get to the times like later on when people call each other dad. Like Mary Jane does it all the time.
Oh God, yeah. And to like men that she's like in relationships with.
Son.
it should be Gwen who'd be saying that. Dun-dun-dun.
Oh boy.
So, going into Amazing Spider-Man 11, taking us through this book, released on January 10th, 1964, with a cover date of April, is Donovan! Yay!
A cover of like sexual assault.
And that won't be the last you hear of that.
Oh my God.
Yes,
Look at his arm. Like Spider-Man's arm.
grabbing his wrist.
He's being forced down.
No. Yeah, with the very new villain, the long-awaited return of Dr. Octopus.
If you think we've seen. Oh, Stan.
Oh, yes. The Turning Point features the return of Dr. Octopus. I hate you, Spider-Man! I'll hate you till the day I die! Is Spider-Man destined to lose Betty Brant, the girl he loves? How did it happen, and why? So this issue is, it really is a turning point because it's the last time we see Betty and the goofy curly hair appears with hers. And we lose a long-time character that we never knew until this issue. It starts-
Look at Spider-Man's hands in that splash page. He's like, "What's up, son?"
Yeah. Why do this to you, baby?
What are you doing?
She's like, "Why you gotta be like that? Hug it out, bitch."
Yeah, Peter doesn't lose the girl he loves at this point. He just loses her haircut.
Shall we? No. Okay. This issue starts off actually right where the last one left off, with Peter moping, unmasked and ungloved in his house, wondering, yeah, Betty's gone. I should probably forget about her. Oh, who kidding? I'll never forget about her. Never stop searching for her. Wait, and he hears at the radio that Dr. Octopus is being released from prison after serving his lifelong term. So apparently, I'm thinking maybe a year has passed, but
they say a year at one point, I believe.
Do they? Because I was looking for that, and going by calendar dates again, it's been 7 months since, or was it 9 months? Either 7 or 9 months. I've written down here. It's been 9 months since issue 3 came out. So is that?
I can't expect Stan Lee to remember that.
So just for the record, if you go try to take over a nuclear power plant, your prison sentence will be 9 months.
I actually have a theory about Peter's age, but that works into that book. Yeah. So Spider-Man jumps out the window and says, y'all can't let him out. It says, but we can't hold him. He served his prison sentence. And you're not in a position to say different. So then we cut to Dr. Octopus, who is at his most hilarious in this issue, with the facial expressions and the sexual come-ons and everything.
Oh God.
Yeah. Oh yes. Mr. Tentacles. So we cut back to
is every Dr. Octopus book going to have a reference to tentacles?
It is now.
In a suggestive sense.
Well, as long as Dr. Octopus is being suggestive, then yeah. And gosh, is he suggestive in this issue? He's like, you get the feeling that he's been in prison for so long.
Oh,
he just needs to get some. It doesn't matter if it's Spider-Man or Betty or Bennett.
Yeah, and that bottom left panel on page 3, he's lighting a cigarette. That's an afterward smoke.
All right, so we come back to Peter back in his house, where he's coming up with another invention. That, yes, it is the first appearance of the Spider Tracer.
Dun 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 dun.
As he goes off to spy on Dr. Octopus. And Dr. Octopus scoffs at the idea of actually taking a regular job. Spider-Man notices that the driver of whoever picks up Dr. Octopus looks like Betty Brant. It's Betty. What's her connection with Dr. Octopus? They speed off, and he runs after her and chucks the Spider Tracer on top of the hood of the car. Conveniently, they drop a map for him to find, so he finds a map for Philadelphia, so he heads there. Meanwhile, we cut to the Philadelphia. Is the Philadelphia prison, or is it the prison in New York?
I get the feeling it's a Philadelphia prison, because that's where Blackie's being held, and that's where they bring Ock to break him out. So yeah.
Or talking about the Blackie Gaxton jail?
Yeah.
Yeah. The caption says our scene now changes to the city of brotherly loves. We're in Philly.
Brotherly love. Oh boy, that takes on a new meaning.
Wow.
especially with the last panel on page 5.
In Philadelphia.
Is that a prison reference?
I'm sure it's a reference to many things.
As are a lot of things in this issue. Yes, we are introduced.
But Philadelphia is a great town
and a great movie.
Blackie. Oh yes. Yeah, we're introduced to this character named Blackie Gaxton, who is he's just a thug in jail, and he's talking to he's coming on his lawyer. A guy who's revealed to be Bennett Brant, the older brother of Betty Brant. Bennett owes him money for some reason, and they say that as if they'll be square if his sister helps break Dr. Octopus out of jail. Bennett's basically a guy with no self-esteem, saying, how did I get in this mess with Gaxton? Now I got Betty, my little sister, into this. This is horrible. So he comes back to his apartment, where we see Dr. Octopus advancing on Betty with his tentacles at tentacles length. So you don't think Dr. Octopus is good enough to talk to you, eh? You haven't said the words since we drove from New York. Hit it, Josh.
Keep away from me! I brought you here as I said I would! But now I want to go! Oh, Bennett! Thank goodness it's you! If Bennett hadn't walked in, if he would have, stopped for coffee or something, he would have walked into, the middle of a rape or something.
With tentacles.
Seriously, look at that panel. He's got Betty, backed up against a wall, and, his tentacles are, on her wrists. He's,
Well, look at panel 6. What exactly are Bennett and Betty about to do?
That's what I say. The dialogue is the only thing that indicates that they're siblings. And siblings, and the art makes it look like they're siblings in the Luke and Leia way.
I wonder if Ditko had, his own ideas.
Well, maybe that was just an aspect of the plot that Stan worked out in the scripting. Maybe they didn't talk about that. That's kind of interesting.
That's possible, but he explained away the sex scene pretty well.
So go ahead, Donovan. Dr. Octopus slaps Bennett around like a little girl.
Yeah, because Bennett, he's not a bad guy. He is a big wimp, and Betty and he are panicking. Oh, what are we gonna do now? I'll make you proud of me, Betty. Oh, I feel sorry for her. So Betty goes back to her classic moping she's done the last 2 issues. I gave him all the money that I had to pay his debts to Blackie, but it wasn't enough. It's never enough. I had to run away from Peter in New York because I didn't want him to know about Bennett. How can I ever return? Where will it all end? Cut back to a happier panel where Peter is somehow convincing his aunt to let him go to Philadelphia all on his own during the weekend. Yeah, I can't do it. And literally says, a few minutes later, after a jet from New York lands in the Philadelphia airport. So yeah, Peter's pretty lucky
Yeah, a
guy.
few minutes later, there's an airplane flight.
My mind, it hurts.
The house in Forest Hills is like right next door to like LaGuardia.
Well, I mean, it shouldn't be that far. I mean, they're in Queens, right?
Yeah.
Forest Hill, I'm pretty sure that's in Queens. It could be in Brooklyn. I can't remember. I confused the two because I never spent a lot of time in either one of those boroughs. But and I've never been to Forest Hills, which is a real part of Queens.
Yeah, Peter never has a Queens accent in any of the live action or.
Well, I was actually thinking about this because this is the 60s, and airport security was nothing compared to what it is today. And if you hit the schedules right, it being a pretty short flight from New York to Philadelphia, this could just be like an hour later.
Well, an hour, not a few minutes later. 60 minutes isn't a few minutes.
That's spider speed.
Yeah, it really helped the jet along with those webs clogging up the engines. That was the only way to get it to go faster.
In the art, does he hold the Spider Tracer remote as a necklace?
That's what it looks like.
Yeah, he's totally necklacing it.
It's bling.
It's bling.
It's also his good luck charm.
He uses his.
Well, that good luck charm did not help Bennett Brant.
No, but it was supposed to help Peter, right? To get the love brother out of the way.
As far as having like a tracker to go along with the tracer, I so much prefer that to the spider sense version, where he can track the tracers with his spider sense.
Yeah, whenever his spider sense becomes an electromagnetic tracer, I have a problem. But I'm going to try to pay attention to see when that first happens, because I've never been able to find that.
The animated series, they went this route too, that it was that he had a little thing that he can look at as opposed to using his spider sense.
It's a tricorder.
I'm a big believer that the spider sense should tell him when there's immediate danger and do nothing else.
Yeah.
That's sort of my take on it.
I like it being vague, it kind of has its own little bendy rules. Just sometimes it's so vague that it's literally ridiculous and it contradicts itself.
Right.
Sometimes, yeah.
So once he gets to Philadelphia,
back to the synopsis.
He gets there and runs into Betty, and they're both in their romantic style 1960s but actually 1940s trench coat, and it's a typical romance scene like where no teenagers would ever talk like this. And...
Peter, you've been searching for me. I've never dreamt.
Yeah, that's exactly the dialogue. They pretty much, she tells him about the whole thing about Blackie Jackson and her brother. And Peter's like, oh, that's not your fault, And great news. Coincidentally, confidentially, Spider-Man's here too, so everything's going to be all right. And this is where you see another classic half-faced spider mask. And in her monologue, in Thoughtful says, I just decided I can't keep it from her any longer. Once we get back to New York, I'm going to tell Betty that I am Spider-Man. Yeah, this will work out.
My girlfriend, who I've only known for a few months, who I know very little about, who just admitted that she has underworld connections. I'm gonna tell her I'm Spider-Man.
You should take his time, like Superman. It took him 53 years.
Oh, I'd rather that not happen. Cut back to Doc Ock, who's talking to himself and going to the prison and breaking Blackie Jackson out. As Spider-Man is swinging around the place and being chased by police who for some reason think that he did it. Jackson and his men go back to Bennett, the Brant's room, where they kidnap Betty and Bennett and take him to their getaway ship. Basically, it's a barge or something. Bennett continues to prove how much of a wimp he is. Betty starts screaming, "No, don't! No! That no!" Gives a signal to Spider-Man because he hears it, and Hart lands onto the ship where he sprains his ankle. He gets caught by the goons, and they're all in the same room where Dr. Octopus starts looking even creepier. Spider-Man gets him pulled by webbing that's stinging so he can hold his own against the guards, and a large fight ensues where guns start popping everywhere. Jackson reaches for a gun where Spider-Man grabs him, and they have a little struggle while shots are being fired left and right. Bennett pushes Betty back and is hit by one of the stray bullets. This clearly upsets the already really upset Betty, who starts saying that it's Spider-Man's fault. He shouldn't have interfered. She hates him. Spider-Man says, and I quote, "You don't know what you're saying. Stop it, girl. You can't mean it." And
she's hitting him so hard that spider on his chest, like the legs are coming off.
I see that. That's probably the speed lines, but yeah.
It's a manufacturer defect.
It's speed lines. You notice how as soon as Bennett dies, Spider-Man immediately, the first thing he does is absolve himself from all responsibility. I told him to stay back until he got away from Blackie's gun. Why didn't he listen? First thing he says.
Yeah, it's not not his response. It's not like the oh crap, it's my responsibility. I got shot kind of Peter Parker. It's the it ain't my fault kind of Peter Parker.
Yeah, he's like, hey, for the record, I told him to stay back. You all heard me say that, right?
Oh, this is inside. I really like because on issue 500, JMS revisited this, and Ramita Jr. drew a panel like where off to the side you can kind of see Dr. Octopus running away. It always kind of made me laugh. But it's not in here, but in that issue you kind of see him kind of saunter away. It's kind of actually kind of look at it.
It's like awkward.
That's it out of here. Yeah, Gaxton runs away, and Spider-Man is like full on crazy mode. So he ignores the pain of his sprained ankle and takes on all the guys, beats the crap out of them, and follows Dr. Octopus down to his getaway sub.
He's on a berserker rage.
Yeah,
Berserk Fury.
Jason.
They're gonna start pulling out his Mortal Kombat moves. Bullshit.
That's Street Fighter 2.
He kind of does some
Shows you how much I know
dialogue
about
too,
those
because he says to Gaxton, "I'll get you, Gaxton. There's no place on Earth you can run from me," and that just makes me think of like the Shocker.
If only.
Gaxton. There's
only one language a killer like you understands, and this is it. Boom. So he knocks these dudes away. He basically like fights a bunch of guys. There's a lot of fighting, but some other experienced henchmen grab Betty, and we got a hostage. Now Spider-Man has to do what we say. Dr. Octopus knocks those guys out and plans to kidnap her, but Betty, who's been in hysterics for the last 3 issues, just faints. Spider-Man tracks Ock down to his speedboat, right? Yeah, that speedboat. They kind of have a struggle in a battle while the speedboat ends up crashing on a pier. Doc Ock seems to have escaped, and Spider-Man escapes the scene as well, while the police round up everybody. Conveniently, Gaxton confesses to everything and clears Betty of the crime. Spider-Man unmasks and webs down his sprained ankle, and we cut back to New York, where it looks like it's the wake of Bennett.
But he has no friends.
No, did you see this guy? He wouldn't have had any friends. Betty kind of comes to her senses and says, it wasn't Spider-Man's fault, but I don't want to see him again because it just reminds me of what happened to Bennett. And this is a real sad ending where Peter's like, I really can't tell her I'm Spider-Man anymore because it'll just bring back memories of her lame dead brother. So we end on a scene with Peter walking into the night while the moody image of Spider-Man haunts over him.
Which is a very famous, iconic image that's been homaged many times.
It's very, very.
Yeah, and the anime series at the end of the Scorpion episode, you see it again.
Issue 50?
Issue 50, I think.
And then Peter Parker leaves Betty alone with her grief as he slowly walks into the night, little dreaming of the new adventures and surprises which await him.
Yeah, that is, well, it's not quite the same as the cover to issue 50 because the cover he's facing forward, but you do have like the little Peter Parker with a bigger Spider-Man, and the idea behind that is that Spider-Man is bigger than Peter Parker. Bigger, not physically, obviously.
I know what you meant, but just like hearing you like try and explain it is funny. You're like, he's bigger.
Well, I do my best.
And I'm thinking, wow, that's like really deep. And then you're like, not physically.
Yeah. Well, then that was also pretty much the end of Amazing Fantasy 15 too.
Yeah.
I don't think that there was a shadow though. I think it was just him walking away like a little girl.
If I flip back real quick, I can see.
What is it with you and little girls? We're still talking about trouble?
Spider-Man is a little girl for all these like early issues. I'm telling you.
He really is.
Bennett was a bigger whip than he was in this entire
and you suddenly lose your female audience.
Like we had.
Yeah, there's no shadow. I mean, but it is a very similar pose.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at it right now.
So how many times has the hero gone to the prison warden to try to stop the guy from being released? I thought that was kind of a novel approach. I don't think I've seen that before. It's like, no, don't let him out.
I've seen it so many times before. I think they did it in an issue of Impulse. They did an issue of no, it's never been done before.
Yeah, it's been done 7 times.
I do think that giving Octavius back his arms while he's in jail was a magnificently idiotic idea. We just recorded our Ultimate 6 coverage for Teenage Wasteland and Ultimate Spider-Man podcast located at teenagewasteland133.libsyn.com. And yes, I'm the showrunner, so I get to pit my own stuff. And that was one of the things that happened. The first sign of cooperation, rehabilitation, they give Octavius his arms back. And what's the first thing he does? he kills everyone in reach and springs all the other baddies from their cells. Doesn't quite do that here, but it's still a very terrible idea to give him his arms back in jail.
I mentioned in another episode that we did that they also did that in Untold Tales. There's a trial and Peter's there with like Betty and the Midtown High gang, and Dr. Octopus is like, you should bring forth Exhibit A, my arms. And Peter's like, wait a minute, guys, don't, it's a trick.
It's a trap.
Yeah.
It's a trap.
It's a trap.
Happy 4th.
It's Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. Whenever you're listening to this, dear listeners.
Like Dr. Octopus looks hilarious in every panel. Like I don't know what it is, but like there's a look on his face. Like in the panel where he's getting in the car and you see Betty, that cracks me up.
He's giving Betty a once over there.
He's like, yeah. You know what? Why did they send Betty to be the driver instead of like some thug or something? And I'm realizing now. I mean, okay, I guess you couldn't send a thug because then the police would know. Like Betty wouldn't arouse suspicion, but maybe like she was sent kind of as a gift to Doc Ock. Like you're getting out of prison. Here's a woman.
That totally fits the facial expressions. Like he's undressing her with his eyes, and she knows she's
the next scene too.
Like it's based like instead of getting a prostitute, they got Betty.
That's so wrong. It totally fits, but it's so wrong.
Yeah, like on all seriousness, that probably is what happened. And the next scene, he's like, "What do you mean you won't have sex with me?"
So you don't even think you're good enough to talk to me, huh?
Bennett walks in just on time. Like if he would have stopped for coffee.
Like 5 minutes later, and she's like, up the ceiling. Like what?
He pins her to the ceiling.
oh man.
Oh God.
I feel
So on Amazing Spider-Man, SVU.
Yeah. Business saver. Police, open up.
I mean, he hasn't met Aunt May yet, so I mean, he has a fixation on Betty for these next few issues. Dear Lord.
Well, it's obvious that Aunt May would definitely cure him of that. I mean,
yeah, she evens him out.
So
during another kidnapping attempt to Betty.
Yeah, he's after Betty and he finds his true love.
So I know that this. I already know this is an inconsistency because Aunt May lets a 16-year-old Peter Parker go to Philadelphia for the weekend, but in a later issue, I remember him trying to go somewhere else, and she's like, "I don't know." He says, "Well, Aunt May, I'm a senior in high school now," and that's when he's older. So what the frack?
Aunt May has Alzheimer's or something.
Yeah, because he is listed and described as being a senior throughout the series. But he does age and go to upper levels of school at the same time.
They've been calling him a senior since issue 8, FYI.
Have they really?
Yeah, remember?
I think they called him a senior in his first issue.
No. He got held back.
Yeah,
then he'd be older.
In Amazing Fantasy 15, they're talking about him qualifying for scholarships.
I thought they kind of did that.
Yeah, but maybe he could start applying for, I don't know.
I was going to say, here's my thing. Here's my theory, and it's not legitimate, it's just my stupid idea, but I think from because he graduates in issue 28, right? So that is 4 years in high school. 7 by 4 is 28. So from issue 1 to 7, he's 15. 8 to 14, he's 16. 15 to 21, he's 17. And 22 to 28, he's 18. That's how I see it.
Yeah, but you're dividing it up evenly, and for all you know, like issues 1 through 10 can take place over 6 months, and issues 10 through 20 can take place over 2 months. You know what I mean?
I never said it made sense, but that's kind of how I see it.
I mean, I don't. Yeah,
I'm just going to point out real quick, trying to rationalize time in comic books is just an exercise in futility.
Right.
Franklin Richards, say no more.
Yeah, it's an exercise in stupidity.
And Franklin Richards' sister, she's already like past toddler aged.
I mean, they have been getting.
It hasn't even been that long.
All they've been doing is getting
by
closer.
all rights, Spider-Man should be like 50 years old right now.
By all rights, but hey, he's not.
And Superman should be dead.
Well, yeah,
they
Aunt May should be dead.
Aunt May.
Yeah, and she has.
She's been
she'll
dead
talk to you
times.
about it. She says it was
and
a fun
her
vacation.
actress.
I find it so funny that in this issue, Peter's so willing to tell Betty, oh, by the way, Spider-Man's in Philly. Granted, he was planning on telling her who he was anyway, but later on in the series, when he's not as young and stupid, he's afraid, like, oh no, I can't let Spider-Man be seen here while Peter Parker's here visiting, or, oh no.
Yeah, like with Gwen.
Like with Gwen in London, where granted that was another country, so it would have been a little more suspicious, but all the time he's like, if Spider-Man's seen in the same state that Peter Parker's in, people are going to think that I'm Spider-Man. That he was like, oh yeah, Spider-Man's in Philly. And Betty, she's like, Peter, you came looking for me? Wait, aren't you a teenager in high school and you left the state without parents. Like, I don't think a teenager would be able to do that. Like, when I was 17,
No, they wouldn't.
let's say he's 17. When I was 17, if my girlfriend would have left town, I don't think I would have been able to, like, show up in another city looking for her. Like, I think, yeah, she'd be surprised to see, but she'd be thinking, how on earth did you get here by yourself?
I don't know. I had an apartment to myself when I was 17 for the summer.
It's like an episode of The Wonder Years because they kind of pull the that crap a lot.
It's like Winnie Cooper.
Oh,
Well, I mean,
God.
I was pretty much on my own anyway. I went to college when I was 16.
Oh, okay.
So talking about the
Wait,
whole giving up your identity when you're traveling thing, isn't that, I mean, while Superman was in exile, isn't that why he never changed to Clark Kent? Because if Mongol saw Superman and Clark Kent at the same time, he would know Superman's identity.
Why would he need to be Clark Kent while he's in space?
Yeah, plus I don't think he had glasses at that point. I don't think he had it in his mind when he left the planet that he would need to change into Clark Kent at any time.
I was joking, but that's okay.
Okay.
Because Mongol's not going to give a rat's ass who Clark Kent is.
You can mess around with secret identities. One of my favorite ones with Superman, this was sometime in the 50s. I can't point to a specific issue. Actually, it may have even been in the 40s. He rescued some third world country. I think it was from a tsunami or something to that effect. And so they created a postage stamp. Now, this third world country, it doesn't exist in real life, but it has 2 O's in the name. It's a really long name. So they made a postage stamp with the name of their country on it with Superman. And the 2 O's were over his face like glasses. So he had to stop production of this stamp that was honoring him.
I've seen that story. I've read that story. So it's pre-1955.
That's like when he had to destroy that Pat Boone record, because the Pat Boone record had a subliminal message that he was really Clark Kent, and like he had to like track down all the records and destroy them and destroy the lyric sheet.
I recently read the one where he had rainbows that shot out of his fingers and could create a little mini version of himself, and that was like his fantastic new superpower.
I'm not surprised. Silver Age, you know.
I think it was even pre-Silver Age. I can probably dig it out real quick.
Okay.
Welcome to the Makes No Sense podcast.
But yeah, you think that this stuff is weird? If we ever did a podcast about Silver Age Superman, cut to a year later where we're doing it, I mean, we would just spend like the whole, like we'd do like a 5-minute recap and then the rest of the episode. What the heck?
I've got a pretty good amount of Silver Age Superman. If you do that, tell me.
We'll never ever do a Superman podcast 1 year later. I can't believe we're doing a Superman podcast.
Okay, episode 50 of Superman Film. So this is the issue where Supergirl turns into a magic frog and Jimmy Olsen, you know.
From World War to Crisis. Dun, dun,
Okay,
dun, dun.
the one with the rainbows coming out of his fingers, that is Superman number 125.
Okay, I was going to say, that's Silver Age.
God,
I'm in 1955, which is the year before the Silver Age, and I hadn't seen it.
I'm
Well,
already
this is a 10 center, and hold on, this is in my Superman Man of Tomorrow archives.
125, I'm going to guess 1957.
I'm already on too many podcasts, but I'd totally be down for this just because of how much fun it would be.
I've been considering it, but I have too much stuff going on in my life.
Well, fair enough. It was November 1958.
Okay. That's right, because Superman wasn't monthly. It was like 2 out of 3 or something like that. Okay.
Yeah, Superman didn't get monthly for a while. It was really weird.
So yay for the first Spider Tracer, but watch out, Pete, because these things are going to be used to frame you for murder in about 580 issues.
Oh, yeah.
All right, yeah.
Well, he gets framed all the time. He doesn't care. And on the whole thing about Peter and Betty's reunion scene, how come Betty doesn't ask how Peter found her? I mean, granted, she's got a lot on her mind, but wouldn't that be a little suspicious? Like, yeah, how did you find me?
Are you stalking me? She's so relieved to see him, you know, because her brother lover is in trouble.
Just imagine, like, the whole car ride, like, you know, she's so tense and she's really been, like, and you can, like, imagine Dr. Octopus, he, like, puts a tentacle on her shoulder and starts to, like, you know, put, like, the sleeve of her shirt down to, like, reveal a shoulder, and she, like, just flinches and keeps driving and just, like, says nothing.
What I want to know is if Dr. Octopus and Blackie and Bennett are all in the middle of this big, you know, criminal planning shenanigans, why did they allow Betty to go walking down the street?
So that she could meet Peter Parker, it's a plot device and it had to go somewhere?
I'm
sure that's not what it was.
Just saying.
I think that, I mean, I get the point that Bennett was supposed to keep an eye on Betty, that he was kind of trusted to do that.
Okay.
And that if Betty did anything, there was kind of a trust going on that if Betty did anything, like, she wasn't going to run off, because if she did, then Bennett would have been whacked.
So page 5 in another episode in the life of John reading these books as a kid, I didn't get the whole Penzi reference. He says he picks up a map of Philadelphia and says, and they're Pennsy plates, so that means it must be in Pennsylvania. My knowledge of geography up in the Northeast was so limited that attaching Philadelphia to Pennsylvania and the word Pennsy, it just didn't click in my head when I was little bitty. Of course, I did figure it out later, but Moral of this story, this issue overall, credit is bad, kids. Don't borrow money unless you have to, and only from reputable sources, like banks, not gangsters. They might try to kill you, or your sister. Free tips for living from John Wilson.
You could see like a public service announcement that they sometimes do at the end of sitcoms if they tackle a serious topic like abortion. It's like, hi, I'm Peter Parker, and I like to go web swinging, but here's something that's a little more serious. Loan sharks. Never trust a loan shark.
Especially if his name is Blackie, because every bad gangster's name is Blackie.
Which Stanley would later reuse that name, Blackie, for the second Vulture.
Yeah.
Speaking of Stanley reusing, this entire plot would get recycled about, let's say, 70 issues or so later, with Dr. Octopus and Peter fighting, and Captain Stacy gets caught, and basically the loved one of his current girlfriend getting caught in the crossfire. And right down to that person banging on Spider-Man's chest saying, I hate you, and Spider-Man saying, now I can never reveal to her who I really am. The same villain is used and everything. And
I had never made the connection.
Oh, I did like years ago. I was like, wow, this is like, it's almost a direct lift. The story, I mean, people talk about retreads now, like, oh, Spider-Man did that in issue derpa retread, but Stan was doing it too. Stan was retreading his own stuff.
It's a Spider-Man trope to recycle stories.
I know it's.
But seriously, who would ever notice?
Do you think that like Gwen and Betty ever like sat down and was like, yeah, Spider-Man kills our family members?
What was that? Was that 90 or 96? When did Stacy die? Was that 90?
No, that was 121.
No, Gwen Stacy died in 121.
No, not Gwen, Captain.
I want to say 90 or 91.
Okay.
Or no, it was in the late 80s, because issue 87 was when he like did that whole drunken coming into the birthday party thing and saying, I'm Spider-Man.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 90. But,
yeah, let's call it 90, and we're in 11, so that's 80 issues. So that's
but
6.5 years.
It is 90.
At least we didn't have a scene of Spider-Man carrying Bennett away after he's been shot. It's like, you have to take care of her, Peter. You know who I was all along?
That would have been crap. That would have been horrible.
Especially since he never met Peter before at this
point. But when Captain Stacy does, who bangs on Spider-Man's chest?
Gwen?
Gwen does, like, it's not that issue, but it's like one of the...
Oh, when Iceman is in it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few times where she runs into him, and there's, like, seriously identical scenes. Like, when they're in the car after his funeral, like, it's almost a dialogue-for-dialogue rip of Betty's...
Oh, Stanley, the only man to rip himself off.
He's ripping. He's like, I figure nobody remembers that now. A lot of people, when they talk...
That's around the time of the Arnold Schwarzenegger ad for bodybuilding.
Yeah. A lot of people, when they talk about Peter and Betty's relationship and why they broke up, they always talk about this as the beginning of the end. But really, at this point, they've only been dating for a few issues, and they don't break up for another...
it's really not... It's like the whole Ditko run is the only time.
It's like, 20, it's almost 20, 30 issues after this that they break up. People like to point to this, that, this is when they fell apart. And she actually forgives Spider-Man pretty quickly. She has no issues being around him in Spider-Man Annual 1. And in issue 17, she's casually walking with Peter down the streets, and she's like, oh, Spider-Man's a nice guy. He has saved my life a few times.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's kind of interesting because they're towing Betty to be like the great love of Peter Parker in dialogue, but really, their relationship just kind of falls by the wayside, like, naturally. It's not due to any stupid thing happening. It's just, and it lasts like pretty much the entire Ditko run is pretty much like the length of their relationship, pretty much.
Yeah, and Betty gets over the death of her brother pretty quickly. It's not this thing, but, and it's kind of been retroactive that, Betty will never forgive Spider-Man for the death of her brother, but she does.
Yeah, she does.
I mean,
her mourning is all done privately. It's all done off panel. But yeah, what Donna was saying.
It's all done fast.
The whole Betty Brant relationship. Ramita and Lee decided to write that off, but they did it.
I can't believe they did it again.
Say what?
I can't believe they, Josh is right. This whole thing is ripped off completely when I can't believe they did that.
I love how you're just coming to this realization now.
No, I didn't get it either. I'm totally with Donovan on this. I did not see that connection, but it's a direct.
Doctor Octopus and Gwen, and it's the same thing. He wants to tell her who he is, but then he can't. Hold on, let me read a line of dialogue from Peter in issue 184. No, this is just regarding the Betty thing, because he's thinking about
when Betty gave him a tumble.
No, yeah, I'm reading from when Betty comes back in the 180s, and he's thinking about why he can't be with her, and he mentions how much she hates Spider-Man because of what happened to her brother. Oh yeah. Besides, have I forgotten how much she despises Spider-Man? But she doesn't. But it's this
Marv
thing that
Wolfman, right?
Yeah, Marv Wolfman. It's this thing in the later issues that Betty hates Spider-Man because he killed her brother, but Betty doesn't care.
Well, maybe Peter still thinks that Betty hates Spider-Man. I
didn't even think that was actually brought up that she hates Spider-Man. I thought that because I remember reading these consecutively thanks to the Essentials, and I don't remember that being brought up all that often. But I guess the writers who didn't read the issues kind of put that.
It was brought up a lot later. If you read annuals or this montage of the great loves of Peter's lives, a lot of them will say after the death of Betty's brother Bennett, she hated Spider-Man, and eventually it drove her and Peter apart. It's no, their relationship continued.
That is such a lie.
It's an interesting take on the superhero dynamic. It's sort of a role reversal, because there's the standard Lois Lane loves Superman but not Clark Kent, and either hates Clark Kent or just doesn't care for him, or even that they're friends but doesn't care for him romantically, but is very romantically infatuated with Superman. So you do the role reversal where Betty might not like Spider-Man, and I think that's set up here, but really like Peter Parker. That is set up here. It just isn't played with again after that.
Yeah, exactly.
She mentioned
so you could take that from here, except that it just isn't played with again anytime soon.
She mentions her brother briefly when Peter tries to propose to her because he's trying to one-up Ned Leeds. Literally, Peter's going to base a whole marriage off of one-upping Ned Leeds because he's Ned proposed. Well, I better propose now, too.
Yeah, he's like, I got to propose fast right now.
Yeah. And Betty's oh, I haven't forgotten about Spider-Man and my brother. But, she says that she hates adventure, that she hasn't forgotten what happened to her brother.
Yeah, that's an aspect of her character that's new here. I mean, you brought it up in issue number 7 that at the end of that story, she's just been hiding behind the desk the whole time, not cowering in fear or having emotional breakdowns, just getting to a safe place. But I think with this whole Betty Brant thing, they've taken her character in a much more cowardly direction that, frankly, I'm glad is no longer true, but kind of puts her in a bad light.
She has to be the damsel in distress, because now she's the girlfriend. She's the leading lady of the strip. So.
Which is the same thing they did to Gwen Stacy after they finally hooked up, is Gwen lost all of her personality and she became the damsel in distress, or the love girl on the arm.
I would even argue that when she started become seriously attracted to him and really wanted his attention, she after the post Ramita issues, that she lost her personality.
Oh, I'm reading to Lily. We're still in the Ramita issues, and she is no longer a person. She's a girl cardboard cutout.
She's a blonde-haired, blue-eyed caricature.
Caricature, exactly.
She's an archetype.
Yes.
Well, she's Silver
She's there to
Age
serve a
girlfriend.
purpose, not to have a character.
Silver Age girlfriends are not characters. They're Silver Age girlfriends. They function for the sake of drama.
Until they get their own series.
But there's no issue where Peter
I had a
and
Silver
Betty...
Age girlfriend in high school.
There's no issue where Peter and Betty just break up. You can say Peter.
Yeah, they just dissolve.
You can say Peter and Mary Jane broke up in issue 193 of Amazing. Peter and the Black Cat broke up in Spectacular Spider-Man issue 100. Then again in issue 129. But Peter and Betty, it's she says that Ned proposed to her. Peter gets mad. Betty wants to talk to Peter about it. Peter doesn't want to talk to Betty. Betty leaves town. Peter wonders where Betty went. Betty comes back, and then they just have coffee casually. And they've drifted apart.
That first date is where it ends. I mean, that's where the arc is drawn to a narrative close, because they go out for coffee to, they think that, they're going to have this big reunion, and they realize there's no spark. So while there wasn't an event that brought them apart, there definitely was an event that brought the narrative to a close. Does anyone else have any other thoughts on this?
Betty Brant getting the cops clearing her of everything. I think that she would have been in a little more trouble.
Yeah, that's way too convenient.
Yeah.
I only have one other note, and it's this: Spider-Man sprained his ankle.
He landed on a rope.
And then on page 19, he's landing on the boat on the bad ankle.
Does anybody notice what's missing from the
He heals
story?
quickly.
Well, we had a hit point, so I'm not sure.
A date between Peter and Betty ever?
J. Jonah Jameson.
I was going to say,
Oh, yeah?
I thought, but I wasn't sure.
I mean, he's not saying Spider-Man's really Blackie Gaxton, and I can prove it. Parker, get me a picture.
And there's no, oh, you're going to go to Pennsylvania with that J. Jonah Jameson? Oh, he'll take good care of you.
Mhm.
Jonah would have been there like saying to Betty, don't worry, I'll prosecute Spider-Man for your brother's death. He hates me more than ever now.
This entire story.
He got the same thing with Frederick Roswell.
We do have some first appearances here, of course, with Betty Brant, who dies, but he does appear in retcon stories later. The one I know about being Untold Tales number 12. Also, Blackie Gaxton. Despite all the bad guys you will see over the years named Blackie, this Blackie Gaxton never appears again in the comics. But we do know that he went to jail, and according to the prose novel Down These Mean Streets by Keith R.A. DeCandido, Gaxton reformed after serving his sentence and became a store manager.
What? I thought you were going to say got the electric chair. I'm like waiting and waiting.
Me too.
Nope.
And then you're like, reformed and opened up a convenience store.
Exactly.
What kind of store was it?
The notes I had, all it said was store manager. I haven't actually read the novel. I was just looking off.
Blackboard.
It was a Kmart.
It's actually a front. Since this was DeCandido writing the book, it could have just as easily been that Gaxton became a Klingon ship captain. Because, I don't know, I guess y'all don't know, he writes a lot of Star Trek books with Klingons. If I can do another shameless plug, we did interview Mr. DeCandido on Teenage Wasteland and Ultimate Spider-Man podcast as part of our Venom coverage in episode number 20. He wrote some prose stories involving Venom, a novel or two and a short story or two in the late 90s. So we brought him on to do some Venom talk. There are ads in this issue, the Fantastic Four number 25 and the X-Men number 4. The Fantastic Four book features a fight between the Hulk and the Thing that ends up leaking into the next month. And the X-Men finally meet the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants for the first time, with first appearances of all those characters, most notably Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch, who is green on the cover. And there's another ad for 2 more triumphs from Marvel. First is the Avengers number 4, where finally, at long last, Captain America lives again.
Yeah.
Yay!
Dun, 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 ice. Dun, dun, dun. Because he was frozen in ice, you know.
Yeah. Ice.
Ice,
Well,
baby.
speaking of the Avengers, you notice there's one of the letter writers said, did you ever consider putting Spider-Man in the Avengers book? To which I reply, yeah, wait about a few decades.
Yeah, wait till
Spider-Man doesn't belong in the Avengers. That's the thing.
There's a lot of clairvoyance in these in some of these letters. Like one person said, wow, with Spider-Man in love with Sue and Reed in love with Sue and Namor, there's going to be a rumble going on, which they did a story about that in Untold Tales Annual 1. And then there's
All the Untold Tales are based off the letters.
and then there's one where some guy's like, hey, you should give Spider-Man a Spider Kid. And then they say, he's not even married yet.
sad trombone.
Well, the wedding has holes in it, so it could happen.
Real quick before we keep talking about the letters, Daredevil number 1 also got advertised here. It's saying, in the sensational Spider-Man tradition, Dare-Devil, the most daringly different superhero of all, as only the mighty Marvel Comics group could present him, destined to become the smash success of 64. See what the shouting's about. Get your copy today. So yay, Daredevil.
Daredevil in the Silver Age, it's very underrated because lots of people are like, oh my god, Daredevil was not even created until Frank Miller came and reimagined the character and made him awesome. I like the Daredevil Silver Age stuff.
Me too. I love the early Daredevil. I've read the first 20 issues or so. I should read more. And in fact, I've only read a couple of the Frank Miller ones, and I enjoyed them. But again, for me, Marvel in the Silver Age is my favorite for Marvel.
I actually got the first volume of the Essentials a couple of months ago. I've actually only made it to issue 2 because Stanley has a habit of like describing his powers in every single panel. Like, with my superhuman system touch, I can touch the faint marks of the fingerprint, and it's like really overly descriptive. So it's, to me, it's a little hard to get into, but I've not read all that much of it.
No, you're completely right. He so over narrates the use of the powers for a lot of those early issues. But I think the problem with Daredevil is that all of the modern fans of Daredevil like the modern Daredevil. So you go back to a issue of, Stan Lee or whoever wrote Daredevil after Stan Lee.
Bill Everett.
Bill Everett. No, he was an artist, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think it was an artist.
Anyways, it's a completely different take on the character. But I was talking on one of the Skype chats recently, and somebody, I want to say it was Thomas DJ, was talking about Daredevil, and Daredevil Daredevil's like the opposite of most superheroes. He spends his entire life bottling up his personality, because for the sake of his studies and for the sake of, being successful in life after his dad died, he had to, be this straight-laced, over-studious, serious person. It's not until he becomes Daredevil that he can finally let loose and be his own self, and even take that to an extreme with the whole Mike Murdock story when that came about. But
oh God, Mike Murdock, that was one of the craziest Silver Age things ever.
But it was Daredevil, hanging loose and letting himself be silly for the first time.
It's basically a male version of Mary Jane Watson from the Silver Age.
Oh my
Really
God.
Oh, Daddy-o. Oh, hey, Mike, where's your brother Matt? Oh, be right back. Oh,
You gotta be shitting me.
Well, the original Daredevil costume is I really do prefer it, as most people do, when he did turn it to red, because this yellow one, I just have to think, this one was designed by a blind person.
And it's like he and Foggy never knew any women in college, because the second that both of them meet Karen Page, no, they're not trying to date her or they're not trying to take her to bed. They both want to marry her. Like, within the first few issues, they're both thinking about how they're going to propose marriage to this woman.
Skip the dating. I mean, I can't imagine going back to the dating scene. I'm so happy that I'm married. I don't want to go back to the dating scene. I really don't.
This is true.
Clearly, you should not read Amazing Spider-Man right now.
Oh, God.
So going back to the letters page, Paul Fiola says something odd in his letter. He's raving about issue 8, and he says, wow, what a way to kick off the 1964 season of comics. And I don't really know what he means there, because that book's only 3 months before this one. It came out in October. So I just wonder if there's some element of 60s comic culture that I don't know about that considers, October the start of the comic
The only thing
season.
about the 60s culture is that he's probably on drugs when he wrote that letter.
Or 12.
Which issue is he talking about? Is he talking about?
He's talking about
Issue 8.
the Living Brain.
Well, 11 is cover date April, because these were cover dated way in advance so that they could stay on the newsstand longer if they needed to. So if he's talking about issue 8, that was cover date January.
There you go. I didn't think about that, but you are totally right. So yeah, he's talking about launching the 1964 season, meaning the cover dates. Cool. Well, thank you, Jeffrey. I knew there was a reason we had you on here.
Well, I do what I can. I am what I am, and I do what I can.
It was for tax purposes
Yeah.
that we had Jeffrey on here.
Joseph Shea.
Beyond gives you a tax write-off.
Right. Joseph Shea takes him to task for issue 8 as well as several other books, but one thing he says was that he didn't like how the book took place in a school because it didn't give the artist a chance to show his talents. But after I read that, I was thinking that while reading all these issues for this episode, I've been noticing how varied the settings have been for the fight scenes. We have Electro on rooftops, the Enforcers in a parking garage, Octopus on a boat, next issue we're going to have an amusement park, and it just keeps changing after that. I think the school was actually a really great idea to try for an issue. I don't know if y'all have had any opinions about the action and everything in the books.
I like that it's in the school. It's not like Ultimate Spider-Man where like every single thing happens at Midtown High to the point where everyone just like knows that Spider-Man goes to their school.
Yeah.
It's so much worse in Ultimate Spider-Man, though.
Oh, yeah.
Leonard Torado considered the second Vulture story an improvement on the first, and I heartily agree with that, as we talked about earlier. On the bad ideas side, like Josh mentioned earlier, Gunter suggests an issue with a Spider-Man Jr. in it. I think that's an absolute terrible idea, but we do get the funny reply about let Pete get married first.
Hey, Stan was going for it then.
Yeah. And last thing is in the announcements, I love how it says for next issue when they're talking about Spider-Man being unmasked, they add, no, it's not an imaginary tale or a dream episode. It happens. And I didn't understand only until like the last year or so just how much DC was doing imaginary stories and dream stories at this time.
And lots of Lois Lane story. It would say, not a dream, not an imaginary tale. There's actually an issue of like Lois Lane where you see Superman and Lois getting married and then them having super kids, and it says, not a dream, not an imaginary tale. The bride and the groom are not robots. And then like Lois Lane's not sleeping, and then it turns out that it's just their Candor doubles.
Oh my god.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Well,
that
what
kind
a
of
way
thing
out of that
happened.
one.
There were so many imaginary stories. That was like the version of what DC eventually did with Elseworlds, or how Marvel has the
What if?
Yeah, the what if. There are some really good Marvel what if stories, and it's usually helpful to have read the original when it's a take on that. But there were a lot of what if stories that were just completely original, off the cuff. But DC had these imaginary tales, and there were some pretty good ones. I remember I reviewed one for the Superman homepage. It was Superman, I want to say like 204 or 203 or something, where it's Lois Lane has died, but their child Laney, yes, Laney Lane,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she gets sucked into another dimension, and Superman has to go and find her because she's wandering around the Fortress of Solitude and like finds it. It might have been the Phantom Zone, I don't remember, but I have the review on the Superman homepage if anyone wants to check that out.
Well, the whole classic Death of Superman story was a big imaginary story, but it was completely amazing in a Silver Age way.
The super wedding is real. The marriage is not a hoax. The bride and groom are not robots. This romance is not a dream. Of Lois Lane or Superman, a great 3-part novel, The Super Family of Steel. It was their Candor doubles. Spoiler alerts.
That is such a ripoff.
And while Donovan's feeling ripped off about wackiness from DC's Silver Age Superman stories, we're going to wrap up this episode right here. Please remember to check out Jeffrey Taylor's podcast, which he co-hosts, entitled From Crisis to Crisis, a Superman podcast, located at fortressofbaileytude.com or at the supermanhomepage.com, where he also does reviews of the Superman the Animated Series episodes. Next week, we will be returning with the same cast and crew for the wrap-up of the May episodes of Amazing Spider-Man Classics. We'll be covering issue 12, which wraps up the Betty Brant Dr. Octopus extravaganza with more tentacle fun, if you can stand it. And then Mysterio will be returning to plague our web-headed superhero. Feel free to contact the show. Our email address is amazingspidermanclassics@gmail.com, where you can write in and let us know what you think of what we're doing, what you'd like more of, what you'd like less of, and if you like me or don't like me or secretly have a crush on me, that's perfectly fine to say too. You can also follow us on Facebook. I do try to keep the group updated there. Just search Amazing Spider-Man Classics on Facebook.com. There is the main show hosting page at amazingspiderman.libsyn.com, where I'll post pictures, random comments, and other interesting things of note. Also on that page, you can find the beginnings of my X-Men blog that I'm starting up. Hopefully by the time this goes live, I will have the first issues posting done and live and ready to be read. And I do believe that's all for today. Please come check us out next week, and thank you for listening to Amazing Spider-Man Classics. Good night.
Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. Spins a web any size, catches thieves just like flies. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man. Is he strong? Listen, bud, he's got radioactive blood. Can he swing from a thread? Take a look overhead. Hey there goes the Spider-Man. In the chill of night, at the scene of a crime, like a streak of light, he arrives just in time. Spider-Man, Spider-Man, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Wealth and fame, he's ignored. Action is his reward to him. Life is a great big hang-up. Wherever there's a hang-up, you'll find the Spider-Man.
I'm in the middle of watching Rocky 3 right now.
As we do the podcast?
Well, no.
When you've been podcasting as long as Jeffrey, you can like multitask. You can do this while you're, writing a thesis and watching Lost.
And I just won a Game of Minesweeper. Look at that.
Was it expert?
Of course. Why would you play it any other way?
Okay, so Donovan, I think you're doing a synopsis.
Yeah, I think I was doing it.
It's my fault.
No, you're good.